Um, Thank you, everyone. As we discussed in the class, on Fridays after Friday noon times, we're going to have this extra Zoom session where I'm happy to discuss the book chapters, one chapter per week, and this is the third week, and we start with chapter 2, um, where the main arguments of the book actually starts from chapter 2, chapter 1 being an introduction. So in chapter 2, which the focus of that chapter 2 is on, in chapter 1 we have had a bit of a discussion about the necessity of integrating the normative arguments and analytical arguments, especially around the idea of value. But in chapter 2, we have moved into a discussion of the Marxian value theory and why it is necessary to overcome the limitations of that theory, and how we can overcome those limitations, and how we can actually bring the normative and the analytical together, and the rest of it. So in the first page of the chapter, the chapter starts by making an argument that capital or capitalism is actually a value regime. And what do we mean by value regime? Well, the concept of regime means a system or a planned way of doing things, especially when those plans are imposed from above. So capitalism as a value regime, it's about not only creating and circulating and distributing value, anything that we attribute value to, but also it's a system or it's a regime that dictates what should be valued. And in fact, this separation between dictating what should be valued, this is the normative aspect of capitalism, and the analytical aspect of capitalism is when we look at how whatever is valued under capital has been or is being created and circulated and distributed and disputed, and fought over. So, but when we look at for instance, the Marxian approach or the Marxist approach, we see that the Marxian approach or tradition focuses only on the analytical aspect of capital or capitalism, meaning those aspects that are mostly related on how value is extracted out of labor through the production, through the modes of production or production relations, and how it is circulated, distributed, and disputed, and how labor is exploited under such a system, what contradictions would emerge as the result of the system, and what crises are associated with this system. And the expectation is that if we develop a very scientific understanding of capitalism, how it works or how it fails to work, therefore we will be able to criticize it, and we will also be able to realize the loopholes in the system, the weaknesses in the system, and take the advantage of those weaknesses and problems in our revolutionary actions against it, in our transformative actions, in order to go beyond that capitalism. So understanding the contradictions and understanding the root causes of the crisis understanding how it fails to work, or how it works, or how it fails to work. It will actually empowers the working class in order to challenge the system. But what should the system be replaced with? Because in that kind of analysis, we have already accepted the value as dictated by capital. We don't challenge the value. We accept this is how value is being extracted and distributed and and disputed. But we're not questioning why we should accept that value, or what type of value should, or what should be valued instead outside capitalism, when we overcome, when we want to replace capitalism with what we may call communism. So that is, I mean, Marx didn't live long enough to actually outline communism in details, and possibly he left it to intentionally left it to societies and to the working class to figure that out in a democratic way. So this has created a kind of a loophole, because the analysis of the system doesn't include or incorporate any alternative understanding of value into it. But more recently, we see that many movements have emerged, and these movements are arguing for alternative ways of valuing, or alternative perceptions of value. Well, in the 19th century, early 20th century, because the fights were over the working conditions and the material well-being of the working class, it was kind of normal for intellectuals and for critical social theory to focus on, to value the material well-being, and therefore go for materialist perceptions of reality and value. But fast forward to the 60s and 70s, when, especially in the Western societies, in the advanced society, the global North, the working conditions improved. The working class achieved their rights to vote and their rights to create unions, and their political rights and their social rights, and they improved their well-being, their quality of life. Many of the working class people became middle class, and they started to adopt a consumerist way of living, and as the result of that, their ways of valuing things changed, and together with that, also social theory started to change. So, considering the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, now that the basic needs are satisfied, people started, the working classes, now middle classes, started to fight for issues like identity. So in this welfare state, where am I? Where is my identity? If especially you are a woman, if especially you are a people of color, or if especially you have different sexual orientations, or different ethnic background, etc., etc. So their perception of what should be valued, their normative perception of what should be valued, changed towards more cultural aspect of life, more identity aspect of life. But then again, when in the 1990s and early 2000s, we see that the Soviet Union is gone, capitalism has become globalized, new ways of exploitations are set up through new technologies, and again, the third world societies are reconnected to the core. In the middle of the 20th century, they started to become independent. Now, under globalizations, they are brought into one system under capitalism. The concerns about global justice actually gain momentum. and climate change became an existential threat. And you see that there's a return of concerns about the material again. And especially after the GFC, when the GFC global financial crisis happened, we see that again, people started to question especially activists as well as intellectuals started to question capital and capitalism. So the concept of capital and capitalism, which was kind of um, forgotten, was brought back to the center of discussions and arguments, and this return of attention to capital was associated with a return of attention to Marx and the Marxian value theory. But with that return also came all the old controversies, all the around the limitations of that theory. So which in this chapter it actually tries to address those limitations. Now that we have to deal with value again, not that we have to deal with Marx again, what are those limitations and how we can overcome those, how we can reconstruct that theory that would actually give us satisfactory answers to our questions and would pave the way for moving forward practically in order to replace capitalism or transform it into a much better system. And in the current situation, I would say things that we value. So although not only the attention to material is back, but also we haven't lost our attention to identity. We haven't lost our attention to women's status, to marginalized groups' status, to the status of nature, and the like. And this makes things much more complex. So whereas in the earlier stages of capitalism, the attention was, or the efforts and the struggles were mostly, and theory also, critical theory, were also mostly focused on the material aspects of life. And then later on in the 20th century, shifted to the cultural, the subjective, the identity aspect of it. In the current time, we have a mixture of both. We pay attention to identity, but also we pay attention to the material well-being, the material aspects of quality of life, and not just the subjective aspect of it, because we see a demise in the status of the working classes. We see socioeconomic inequalities growing again. And we see exploitation of the natural resources, as well as exploitation of cheap labor in the global south is back on the agenda. And as the result of that, these inequalities are also associated with other types of inequality, not just class, but also gender, but also ethnicity and race, and other types, other cultural aspects. So it's an intersectionality playing some role here. So the next section is about the dual character of value in theory. Again, this is we touched upon this earlier in chapter 1, but here it's the argument expands a bit, and it argues that, well, what happened in 20th century, that many theorists actually abandoned value theory. But now that the value theory is back on the agenda, people like David Graeber, Mariana Mazzucato, and the rest have written about the necessity of paying attention to value. This abandonment didn't mean, or doesn't mean, that the concept of value is obsolete and we should it has no use anymore. Why? Well, I think these are interesting quotes from from this chapter that every mode of social living is basically formed and constantly reformed around ever-changing intersubjective construction and collective realization, distribution, and demolition of value in all its possible socio-ecological forms, etc., etc. So this is, again, repeats what we had in the first page, that if you look at every way of living that people live together, and within their environment, these ways of living are about different ways of actually defining what should be valued, how to create that value, how to distribute it, how to realize it, how to distribute it, and even the ways that the value gets lost and demolished. So we can define ways of living, different ways of living based on their relationship with value, how to define it, and how to create it in reality, how to construct it together intersubjectively, and how to actually realize and distribute and even demolish that. And it's another interesting quote that says the history of existing societies, past and present and future, is the history of two separate yet overlapping ideal types of a struggle. One is between the value makers and value takers within the dominant value regime over the distribution of value. So we've got one type of a struggle in each society is between those who make value and those who take value. That distribution has always been there between the master and a slave, between the lord and the peasant, between the owners of or employers or owners of businesses and the employees, the working class, etc., etc. So in each society, we see that kind of conflict or struggles. But in addition to that, we have also another type of a struggle between those who want to change the way things are valued, and they actually question the value regime in its core, rather than trying to make it fairer, or in addition to making it fairer, they want to also change the way things are valued. They want to defy the way value is determined or is dictated. So I would say GFC, global gross domestic product, GDP, I should have said, GDP, global domestic product, or economic growth, or the economic value, or the dollar value, or the price of things are not the only sources of value, are not the only ways we should value things, but we should also value the quality of life for humans and for non-human living beings. So this is the second type of the struggle, is more important, is more transformative, because it challenges the system. And since we can actually explain history of societies in terms of their relationship with value, it is extremely essential. You can never argue that, as the book argues, you can never argue against the importance of value and theorizing value. Okay. So we should actually, and not only that, but we should actually place value at the center of our transformative theory. Okay, next, in the next page, again, this differentiation between two types of struggles has actually translated itself into the ways that we create theory. We do theorization, and we can separate between two types of critical theories. The first one, the first type, would be the ones that are very primarily analytical, and which means that um, they again, as I said before, they consider value as something objective, an advantageous quality extracted out of its resources to sustain and amplify the ruling social order. This is what normally critical theories, like especially the Marxian value theory, do. What they do is that they say, okay, let's define value as it is determined, as it is dictated by the ruling order. And now let's reflect on it. Let's analyze that and see how the production of value under this capitalist system, for instance, results in contradiction, results in crisis, etc., etc. And so it's primarily analytical. But it has, but normative. The normative aspect is by implication. What do we mean by when we say it's the normative is by implication? It means that a system that fails to work, a system that is crisis prone, a system that is contradictory, is a bad system, and it needs to be replaced. It's a system that exploits. It is a system that alienates value makers, etc., etc. And therefore, we assume that a system, since we assume that a system that fails to work is a bad one, therefore, by implication, a good one is the one that avoids this crisis. But as you see that there is a black box here, there's a black hole or a loophole that we don't know, then we're not making an argument about what then should replace such a system. What kind of system would not have the crises, would not have the contradictions that the current system has? So this is the problem with the first type of critical theory or theorization. The second one is the ones that are go primarily normative, and what they do is that they would say we're going to define value the way we want. We don't care how it is defined by this system or dictated by the ruling system or ruling social order. And we don't want to wait for this system to be overthrown or challenged. We want to create our own spaces, autonomous spaces that are independent from the system. And we want to set up our own ways of living that values what we believe should be valued. And as the result of that, we create many pockets of transformation, many instances, many examples in many different ways, very plural, very diverse. And by growing these alternatives, gradually we get to a level that is a threshold level, and the system would flip, the reality would flip in our own favor. And therefore, we don't need to bother ourselves with too much of analyzing the current system and how it works or how it doesn't work, etc., etc. Um, um, so they most of them, if not all, they value the essence of good life, the way they define good life, whatever in whatever way they define it, and they push for those for their own agendas. Bioregionalism, transition towns, eco villages, solar punk cities, permaculture. There's a very long list of such initiatives that, as part of a project with my team, we have been mapping them. So what's the problem with them? Well, the problem with them is that, of course, because these primarily normative theories that only focus or mostly focus on the alternatives ways of living, they fail to comprehend and understand the ruling system, and as the result of that, their efforts mostly remain limited. They don't escalate to a level that they would challenge this system to its core, and a expectation that one day, as the result of interactions between these new movements, alternative movements, finally the reality would flip in our own favor, would change in our own favor. It hasn't come. I mean, the system, when it realizes that such initiatives are a threat to it, it smashes them. And many of such initiatives find themselves in their own little bubbles, trying to survive, maintaining their own principles, but many times also compromising their own principles. And the system also sometimes incorporates them into it, into its own existence. And you see that both theories, either the ones that are primarily analytical, they have significant weaknesses. The ones that are primarily normative, they also have their own significant weaknesses. And as a result of that, it is important. So it is important to try to bring these two together and create a dialectic between reality and truth, between our understanding of reality. Well, this is our understanding of reality. This is how the reality is functioning or dysfunctioning, and this is the truth. This is the ideals that we want to pursue, and we want to actually see how the system is failing us to pursue those ideals, and how bringing those ideals into our understanding of reality can transform the reality itself, and can transform our understanding of reality as well. So you may ask what good life is, because many of these normative or idealistic views focus on their own perception of good life. Well, a good life can be considered as social imagining constructed to negate sources of human suffering. So this is a very minimalistic understanding of good life. Which has become very much gain momentum in current movements like the degrowth movement, the well-being economy movement, etc., etc. And they're not imposing a very specific definition of good life. They say, okay, if we secure a level where sources of human suffering are eliminated by and large, then we can say we have achieved the baseline for good life. And this could be enough to actually start with, because true value is every quality, everything that results in such a good life. Now, of course, good life also means to flourish and to go beyond just suffering, so or eliminating the sources of suffering. But how to flourish is something that is dependent on society, is dependent on communities to define for themselves. Um, um, so this is so when we develop our definition of true value, we're not actually we relate true value to the quality of life, the good life, but this good life, our understanding of good life is partly defined objectively by science. For instance, science would tell us that climate change causes suffering. So eliminating or mitigating climate change or climate crisis is something that is universally applicable. It's not something that a group of people want to impose on others. So it has some objective scientific basis in the reality that is quite undeniable, regardless of what community we are in. But another aspect of it is very subjective. It depends on how people understand good life, how people understand flourishing or self-fulfillment, etc., etc. Their own value systems would play some role. So that's why our definition of true value, which is related directly to good life, whatever causes good life has a true value. This definition is not 100% universalistic that would impose itself on different identities, on different cultures. Every culture, every society, first and foremost, need to have access to natural resources that keep regenerating themselves, to clean air, to clean water, to healthy food, etc., etc. So, but also a lot of a significant aspect of it is also depends on those societies, how they want to define the rest of that good life for themselves, the cultural aspect of it, the identity aspect of it, the subjective aspect of it. Um, okay. So so we may ask, where does normativity come from? Our normative understanding of an ideal, our understanding of an ideal way of living. Well, there are multiple resources for that. We don't need to think that anything that is ideal is the product of our own imagination, and it's too idealistic, too imaginary, and would never be realistic, or can never be realized. So what are those sources that we have access to in order to define what should be valued? That is, for instance, our moral value systems, all which are subject of course, controversies and discussions and disputes, but they are there, and they inspire us to define what is the ideal life, what is the good life. Another source is when we look at the ways that people in the past or in the present are struggling for justice, for better life, and we look at those struggles and we learn from them what they value, and we may endorse or reject or criticize. So this is another source of on understanding or defining good life. Possibilities for future. Well, that would be very imaginary, but anything, what we can't say anything that is, everything that is imaginary, it would never ever be realized, or would be unrealistic. Many times throughout human history, we have imagined things, a lot of things that we have imagined we could realize them, and of course a lot of things that we have imagined we couldn't realize them. But imagination of possible futures, future scenarios, has always been motivating people, has always been there for humanity to reflect on, to get inspiration from, and to move forward. So this would require both intellectual reflection and activism, as you can imagine, and um, and uh, and so these are the sources that we can get insights from, and and in our perception of good life, and as the result of that, anything that results in such good life has a true value. So this is the normative side of our theory, but that true value or good life can be used as a way of benchmarking against the reality, or we can benchmark the reality, the current reality, the status quo, against those ideals that we have in mind collectively, of course, and by doing that, we can actually criticize the reality, not because of failing us in terms of its own standards, but also because of failing us in terms of our own standards, that which stand way above and beyond beyond the current system. And this would actually makes us much more transformative. Our theories, our actions become much more transformative. So these questions like, what alternative realities potentially or actually exist? How are the potentialities or capacities and struggles for their realization inhibited in the current system of social formation, in the current social formation, in the current system? And what socio-ecological mechanisms would actualize them to the level that they would transmute the conventional reality in its totality. So this, what are these alternatives? What alternatives exist? What alternatives can be imagined? What are the obstacles? How we can realize those alternatives despite obstacles? These sort of questions shouldn't be considered as secondary to questions like how the system works or fails to work. When we say how the system fails to work, we have to incorporate we have to expand that question by saying that how the system fails to work in terms of, or how the system prevents us from realizing our ideals, our way of achieving good life. And this kind of question, you see that bringing this into the question, to the core questions, would actually make the integration between the analytical, the analysis of the system, and the normative, our perception of the good life, possible in just one single integrated way of theorizing. So an integrated theory that is both normative and analytical would actually tell us that how true value is weakened or demolished under the system, rather than just saying how the fake value dictated by the system is being created. It says how actually the true value that in the absence of this dysfunctional system could have been produced, how that is lost. So instead of actually considering the base at the zero level, where there is no such a system, such a dysfunctional system, we consider that actually in the absence of this bad system, we could actually achieve a lot more good things. And we not only have the problems that the system has created for us, but we have also lost all good things that we could potentially do. So it is important to imagine and discuss what those potential good things that we could do in the absence of the system are lost. And so those were the sources of true value that are being lost or transformed or perverted into the sources of fake value or fetish value. One example could be, for instance, every car emits greenhouse gases and contributes to climate change. Now, we can evaluate the costs of these by considering the damages that are caused by such emission. That means that we are actually just analyzing the system based on within the framework of the system itself, the current system itself. We are playing the game as the game is set up by the current system. But if we just say, okay, well, we not only are by through these greenhouse gas emissions, we're destroying the environment, when destroying lives, but also we are losing a lot of capacities, a lot of things that we could do in the absence of climate change, a lot of good things that we could do in the absence, those healthy ways of living, people flourishing, nature flourishing, those positive things are also lost. So you see that the normative can actually make us even more critical, more strongly critical of the status quo, and would also give us some view about where we want to go beyond this system, beyond the current system. Now that we have made ourselves familiar with the dual character of value, that value has a normative aspect and an analytical aspect, and we should bring them together. Now we can reflect on the Marxian value theory, on what Marx has said before. So Marx's focus is mostly Marx focuses mostly on the analytical in his value theory. Beyond his value theory, he goes normative, but in his value theory, he is mostly primarily analytical, which means that he tries to analyze the system as it is. So he accepts the way that system defines value, that value comes from labor, that value is labor embedded in commodities, etc., etc. But you don't see any inclusion of a moral position, any normative argument embedded in the value theory, because Marx wants to. So Marxian theory reflects the reality as it is, and he wants to see what the contradictions in that reality, the contradictions in the capitalist way of living. So this causes a bit of an ambiguity, because when we talk about value, people normally think of value as something good. Whereas in Marxian value theory, value is not good. There is nothing good or positive about value. There is even nothing good or positive about labor, because labor has become a proxy of capitalism in order to recreate or regenerate itself. Capitalism regenerating itself through the use of labor. So the labor is the working class has become alienated from their own environment, natural, their organic relationship with the environment, their solidarity, their communal solidarity is broken. They are dislocated. They're moved or forced to move because of the necessity of surviving under the new system, to the cities, to the factories, to the businesses that are run by capitalists. And as the result of that, there is nothing really positive about the value they produce, because this is what because it is embedded in capital, it is embedded in commodities, and it is produced by labor that has become alienated from itself, from its products, from the production process, from its own humanity, from its own communal solidarity, etc., etc. But when, for instance, this ambiguity that uh, is embedded here, because on the one hand, value has no value, there's nothing positive about value in Marxian value theory. But on the other hand, people will say, well, how about the role of women, for instance, or how about the role of nature? Well, women, nature, communities, etc., etc., because they're not directly incorporated into the capitalist mode of production. From Marx's point of view, they are not also incorporated in his value theory. They are not adding value. And as the result of that, any criticism, any effort to bring to value women's reproductive work, domestic work, affective work, that contradicts, because on the one hand you have a Marxian value theory that attributes no positive moral meaning to value, and on the other hand you have the feminists and environmentalists that they attribute positive things to value, to nature, to the reproductive work of women, etc., etc. And then this is something normative, and they want to bring it into an equation with something that is not normative in the Marxian value, and this causes contradiction. So that's why you have a group of feminists that would say, okay, um, the working class are very much dependent on the domestic work of women, and so as the result of that, women or anyone involved in the housework should be, or domestic work or care should be compensated. By doing that, by saying this, these feminists are already accepting the value as dictated by capitalism. The problem is that, okay, what is the share of women? What is the share of nature, for instance? We have also another group of feminists that would say, no, 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 no. The value that women make through their domestic work is an intrinsically positive, and it cannot be incorporated into the system. We cannot go for um, uh, compensating women's work. That would be contradictory, but we have to establish a new way of living that is totally dependent, that is totally based on care, and rather than the production of commodities or capitalist value, etc., etc. But again, as you see, the second types of feminists, the second group of feminists, they're again going very normative, and they're not analyzing how the work of women, the domestic work of women, for instance, is incorporated and into the system by the capitalism in order to and being indirectly exploited. So this is the ambiguity that is created by, on the one hand, us thinking of value as something positive, and on the other hand, by Marx and Marxian tradition considering value as not something positive, but just something to be analyzed. Okay. So I skipped this part. So yes. So yeah. I won't confuse you more. So yes, another thing about Marx is that Marx intentionally focuses on the inner organization, as he says, the inner organization of capital in its average form, which means that he focuses on the way that production happens and how exploitation happens through these production relations, the factory settings, the working class versus the capitalist class, etc., etc. And he understands that he is actually focusing on the um, average form of it, of capital. Um, so um, so he accepts that his focus is not expanded to the entire system, to the relationship between capitalism and domestic work, the relationship between capitalism and nature. He addressed those aspects outside of his value theory. So his value theory is mostly, or you would say solely, focused on production and productive relationships. So as the result of that, ironically, Marx considers the women's work, the works that happens in the communities, the works that happens outside the capitalist production relations, as unproductive or not productive. Because they don't result in exchange value. They don't end up in being exchanged in the markets, in capitalist markets, and this limits this is a kind of a self-imposed limitation that Marx intentionally accepts in order to show the contradictions of the system, the contradictions of capitalism. And therefore, he leaves those normative aspects, the intrinsic value of nature, the intrinsic value of domestic work in care and community activities and activism, political actions. They're all sources of good value. They leaves them outside his analysis. And this results in a duality that is kind of not very productive, because in this duality you have the inner versus the outer. The inner is where exploitation happens and capitalist value is being exploited. The outer is where the rest of it happens. The nature becomes just a condition of possibility, a precondition, a pretext for the exploitation of the working class. The domestic work of women especially becomes a pretext or a condition of possibility, or a condition for the exploitation of the working class. And they're not directly incorporated into Marxian understanding of how value is produced and distributed and disputed in the system. They're just conditions outside. So and this results in a dualism of inner versus outer. In our theory, in our attempt to fix that, to go beyond Marxian the limitations of Marxian theory, we're against this duality. We're non-duality. We say, no, we not only need to consider the inner organization, the inner structure of capital or capitalism or capitalist production relations, but we also need to consider the outer aspects of it, how actually those aspects of life, the ecological, the social, the cultural, the political aspects of life are actually are involved in the in the emergence of the inner core. Without those things, the inner core is impossible. Yes, Marx agrees with us, but we want to also theorize that relationship. We just don't want to consider them as conditions of possibility, or the preconditions, or the pretext to the inner organizations, to production relations. Okay, according to Marx, commodities have values in under capitalist system, and this value can be measured in terms of how many hours of labor is gone to them. So the embedded labor time in necessary labor time on average, because different workers have different skills, and some workers might be faster than other workers, or more efficient or effective. So he considers an average, or the socially, as he says, the socially necessary labor time that goes into the products that would determine the value of things, the real value of things, the real value of them. But under capitalism, according to Marx, labor also itself becomes a commodity, because it is bought and sold in the labor market, right? So as the result of that, labor has become a commodity. And as the result of that, we can say, so it should have a value. And what is the value of labor, according to Marx, is that socially necessary labor time, that average labor time, that has to go into the reproduction of labor. So the laborers need food to survive, laborers need shelter, laborers need clothing, etc., etc. So those means of subsistence, those things that make the laborers live longer come back to work tomorrow, and also regenerate, reproduce themselves into the next generation of the laborers. All those things, the labor time that goes into the production of those means of subsistence for the laborers are actually the real values of the labor. Now, by doing this, actually, we see that the perception of value is still very much limited to the relationship between capital and labor. Um, uh, and uh, and but we know that the labor, but we have to ask where the labor come from. You see, when we just only focus on the inner organizations, we only are talking about the value that labor produces and puts into the goods and services, and the value of labor itself as a commodity itself. That is being sold and bought. So our perception of value, our Marxian perception of value, is very much limited to the relationship between capital and labor. But we need to ask the question of where does labor come from in the first place? Well, labor is an alienated form of human creativity or creative capacity that in the absence of capitalism you would not expect that is naturally embedded in nature and etc., etc. But through relationships that go beyond production, that labor is dislocated. It is not the capitalist production system that actually takes the land away from or takes the laborers away from their land, from their natural habitats as the community members. It is actually other types of relationships that are normally colonialist, that are normally associated with the state using coercive force in favor of capitalists, etc., etc. So it is, in order to understand the origin of labor, that is also essential to incorporate. So this is one of the other ways that we can go beyond capital. Marx talks about that, but doesn't include that into his value theory. He talks about, for instance, the primitive accumulation that happens in the earliest stages of capitalism, that money is accumulated, capital is accumulated as the result of colonization, as the result of the dislocations of the working classes, etc., etc. The land enclosures, the enclosures of the land, common land, public land, privatization, that which is still going on. As whenever we do privatization, we're actually doing that. We are actually creating labor for capitalism. Because people lose their access to their resources as the result of the public resources and commons as the result of privatization, and therefore they are left with nothing but their own mental and manual labor to sell to the capitalist class. So Marx talks about that, but you don't see that is being incorporated into his value theory. And so this is one of the limitations that we would like to overcome. So value is not just a substance in things, but also a socially necessary standard. And it's a process of evaluating things via exchange, as Marx says. Um, but yeah, but you see that it's very much embedded in the concept of value is very much embedded in the way that the production relations under capitalism are set up. So another concept that Marx uses is surplus value. So what is surplus value? Surplus value means that, um, well, the workers are incorporated into the capitalist production relations. They spend, let's say, 4 hours a day producing a value that is uh, enough for them to actually consume, to turn into money and then buy the necessary things they need to consume in order to survive, the means of subsistence. But capitalism makes sure that they would, for instance, work another extra 4 hours. And that another extra 4 hours a day is the source of surplus value. Again, as you see, this surplus value is again is a matter of magnitude. It's a matter of measuring how much the workers are exploited under capitalism. It fails to tell us actually what places the working class in such a situation in the first place to be exploited. So it does not show that how true value that this working class, these workers could create outside the capitalism when they are freed from capitalism is actually demolished. It's actually turned into extra fee or extra unwaged labor that is the source of surplus value. The surplus value, let's consider it as the profit. So the source of profit for the capitalist is capitalist class. So it doesn't tell us much about, it tells us about exploitation, but it doesn't tell us about expropriation of the human capacity to create and turning it into something that we call labor. Um, so that's another aspect of Marxian value theory, that you see that because it's too analytical, it has it's all very much limited to production relations. And it's the inner organizations, the inside of the belly of the beast, rather than the entire beast of capitalism. Um, okay, I skipped the rest of it maybe. Um, and but again, in the remaining paragraphs in this section, the idea that, for instance, we are criticized by some people that we say, well, true value is just so idealistic because it's not fully realized. We would say that the theories of capitalism, the analytical theories of capitalism, are also actually a bit idealistic, because when they analyze capitalism, they talk about its ideal version, or even as Marx says, its average, and its ideal average. They talk about equilibrium when the demands and supply are in par with each other, are in balance with each other. So this, whereas in reality, this doesn't happen. There's always, the demand sometimes goes above, and sometimes supply goes above, and there's a constant fluctuations. And there is no ideal, there is no average system. So even the so-called analytical, realistic analysis of capitalism, they too suffer from idealism. They too have to think of an ideal version of capitalism in order to run their analysis. So this criticism that true value is too imaginary and idealistic is unfair, because you can apply the same standards to the analytical theories. So Economic growth is both intrinsic and essential to capitalist socio-historical role, and it's conventionally assumed to be linear and unlimited. So how realistic is that? That we think that economic growth can happen forever and it's unlimited. Well, isn't that idealistic? Or for instance, despite the fast-growing rate of the annihilation of the remaining ecological sources of value, capital as fetish value in motion and operation has been exponentially growing in magnitude. Now, true value upon which both human and non-human lives depend holds a greater inherent reality, despite its normative status within our theory, than the realized fetish value under capital. This is because without true value, organized life itself would cease to exist, rendering any extraction of value impossible. So actually true value has a very strong realistic aspect to it, because if true value is about maintaining and improving quality of life, and if life of any quality is a reality, is a necessity, without life, no one can be alive, and therefore there is no capitalism. Therefore, true value is as realistic as capital, even more realistic, because it's more vital, is because it is very critical. And as the result of that, we argue against those who would say true value is or anything normative like true value is unrealistic, is too idealistic, etc., etc. And that's why I say it's a $1 million point in this chapter. Now, let's be a little bit more specific about the limitations of Marx. We have already become familiar with four Aristotelian causes of value production: the material, the efficient, the formal, and also the final, if you may remember. And we had a meditation exercise in order to understand, using the example of honeybee hive. We can say that practically we can use that four causes as a framework to understand the major limitations of Marxian value theory. So let me skip to those four. First, in terms of the efficient cause of true value, we define the efficient cause of true value as, if you may remember, as creativity, the creative capacity of humans and non-human living beings, their ability to flourish, their ability to self-sustain, and create new things for themselves out of all things, which is not just limited to humanity. You could also see that in nature, like in the case of honeybees. When it comes to under capitalism, this creativity turns into labor, hard work that is bought and sold. And Marx focuses on that, but then Marx does not explain where the labor comes from. So that's the first limitation that is related to the first cause of true value, which is creativity, or human, or more than human creative capacity. The works of nature, the works of the domestic works, the affective work, if you like, the communal work, all those works that happen, they are put on the margin under capitalism. And because the Marxian value theory reflects the reality of capitalism, as the result of that, and wants to really mirror that, as the result of that, you see those types of works are also put on the margins. And also his theory does not explain, his value theory does not explain how actually the true value that could have been produced or normally is produced through human creative creativity and more than human creativity is actually transformed into labor and brought in under the rule of capital as a source of creating a value that is only valued by capital, that is dictated by capital. The second limitation is related to the second cause, the second type of causation, which was the material. So when with the material cause of true value, we meant natural resources and habitats and environments and healthy ecosystems that that actually make life possible and make the production of true value possible when they are held or set up as commons, not privatized, not expropriated or turned into property. And the relationship of the value makers with their environment is not based on ownership, but it's based on a stewardship. But you see, again, for Marx, this is not the material cause is very much reduced to natural resources, because this is the case in capitalism. With capitalism, natural resources that they just are like the free gifts, or we may say the free gifts of nature. And we don't know how the value that is embedded in nature is what happens to that. So we need a theory that would tell us what happens to the value that is embedded in nature and then incorporate it into productions, financial relations, etc., etc. What happens to that? How that value of the ecosystem, that ecological value, is transformed into capitalist value. Well, we don't see that under Marxian value theory. The third one, the third limitation is, of course, related to the issue of conviviality. You may remember friendship and solidarity is the formal cause of true value. It is through the, like the honeybees, through their collective work, through their solidarity, through the provision of care they provide for each other, that production of value which is embedded in the honey, in the hive, and their healthy life is made possible. But again, we don't see that under Marxian value, how that conviviality, which is turned into what happens to the value of conviviality. Under Marxian value theory, this is just capitalism replaces conviviality with just exchanges between goods and competition and market relations, and our relationship with each other is based on what I can actually provide you with materially or immaterially, and what you can provide me to be exchanged in a capitalist market based on the dollar prices and etc. etc. So we don't know what happens to the value of conviviality, and so we need to have a value theory that also addresses how conviviality is perverted into some kind of alienating relationships between humans that is very much moderated by money and commodity and capitalist relations or market relations. And finally, another source of value, we would say, is actually our political actions, our people's actions to actually defy the current status quo, to think of a different way of living, and to realize different way of living, and this political agency, I'm using the word political in the broadest way possible, this political agency is lost. So as it is lost under capitalism, it is also lost in Marxian value theory, because Marx wants to, just as I said, mirror the reality in his theory. Whereas we need to know, we need to ask, well, beyond capitalist relations, what happens, production relations, what happens to that agency, that political agency that defies the reality, wants to change, to realize a different way of doing things, that we call it alterity. So what happens to that alterity? How the value of alterity is transformed into something that is actually, at best, is unionism, which means that, fighting for better conditions, and most of the time losing that fight. Because the stronger capitalism become, the weaker the working class and their unionism becomes. So it's instead of people being free to realize their dreams in many different ways, and get involved in political actions and setting up very good policies for a good life, they not only lose that, but they are incorporated into a system that their activism is very much limited in protesting against environmental damages. Or maximum would be going for renewable energy production within the framework of capitalism, in most cases, I would say. So this alterity is also important to be considered. So you see that all four limitations that Marxian value theory show are very much corresponding, or with the four causes of true value. We can use that four causes of true value to detect the four major limitations of Marx, that the labor is very much reduced to the activities of laborers under capitalist production, that nature is marginalized in not only in the system but also in our analysis of the system, that the domestic work and the care, I would say, the and the conviviality and communal solidarities are very much marginalized, and they're turned into preconditions, and also the prefigurative activism or activities, ability of people to alter things and change, to go for change, is also being I would say totally dismissed, only reduced to the working class fights within the capitalist system, or against capitalist system. But we don't know what happens to that, the value embedded in their alterity, when they are incorporated into the system. Now, another section of the book talks about, okay, so in order to overcome these limitations, we not only need to bring the normative and analytical together, we also need to think of sources of value as causes of value, because we have already talked about how actually the Aristotelian doctrine of four causes or causation can actually be very helpful. Because when we normally talk about sources of value and say, okay, labor is the source of value, what do we exactly mean by that? And I would say, yes. Yeah, let me skip that to the core part of it. I would say when we talk about a source, the word source of value is widely used in both classical political economy and Marxian literature. However, despite being the subject of great controversy as to what should be seen as the source of value, surprisingly, extremely limited reflections have been made on what the term source here really means. A source of a thing, by definition, is its point of origin or procurement, or the generative force behind it. It's something that gives existence to that. So when we talk about source, we're talking about the existential cause of something. So if we reflect on that, and if we consider source of something as the cause of something, therefore we can talk about we can have a better understanding of value and its sources, and we can employ the Aristotelian framework of causation. In this page also, as you can see, the book offers the definitions of fetish value and true value. It's another way of overcoming the limitations of Marxian value theory, because Marx is very, as we said, it's very analytical. Practically what Marx means by value, we're going to say he means capitalist value. And we would like to also add another term to Marxian lexicon, which is fetish value, and which is fetish value is capitalist value, but it also includes the loss of true value in it. So the fetish value is the value that is not only the result of, but also results in damaging the more than human capacities to generate true value. So if the more than human capacity to generate good life is lost or damaged, therefore what we are dealing with is fetish value, which includes capitalist value, because it happens under capitalism. And later on in other chapters, we make a clearer distinction between fetish value and capitalist value and commodity value and true value. But for the sake of our argument at this stage, this is the definition of fetish value at this. So fetish value is inclusive of but not limited to the abstract economic exchange value of commodities. It is broader, it is broad enough to include the relations outside the capitalist mode of production itself. Fetish value is thus understood as a quality attributed to the results of any decommoning activity under capital, which is socially fetishized to appear to have an intrinsic value for the well-being of individuals and collectives involved. By this, it means that, okay, well, if true value happens when we do commoning, when we live in commons. Everything is in commons. So in order for capitalism to emerge in the first place, it has to decommon. It has to privatize, it has to dislocate, it has to demolish the communal relationships, it has to replace stewardship with ownership, etc., etc. And this is decommoning. And as a result of this decommonization or decommoning activities, fetish value emerges. And why we call it fetish? Because it makes us believe this is true value, but it is not true value. It makes us be practically worshiping it. It makes us practically pursuing fetish value in the form of money, in the form of the way that capitalism has dictated to us. Consumption. Whereas true value, on the other hand, is any quality definitive and advantages for the survival, self-fulfillment, and liberation of more than human organized life, if and only if it is decided and realized in most consensual, context-specific, collaborative way possible. So if it is actually produced and decided under a kind of a consensual framework, people will agree as much as it's possible. They collaborate with each other, with nature also, and it's very context specific. It depends on their context. It's not universal. So in that case, so that's the first condition for true value to be true value, and the second one is it challenges the mechanisms of fetish value. It doesn't happen somewhere isolated. It also goes political, and it challenges the system to the core. So it doesn't let the system to co-opt it, like the resistance of academics when they go for open access production of knowledge, but but they're co-opted and also weakened by the system. So if that amounts to a level that challenges the system, that would be true value. But if it remains at a level of, for instance, a passive unionism that is only about making life a little bit better, it has some elements of true value, but it doesn't really amount to that level that really defies the system, unless it escalates to that level that changes the structure completely or moves in that direction. Okay, now, so in this page we have the 4 causes of good life. Now, if we consider the source as a cause, then and we apply Aristotelian doctrine, now we have the 4 definitions of what causes good life. Well, there are 4 things that cause good. The efficient cause of true life, which is the human capacities to achieve self-sustained levels of collective well-living, etc., etc. More than human creativity. It's not just about creating things, but also engage in leisure, play, love, work of aesthetics, a spiritual, introspective, and amusing things. So this is creative capacity of more than humans. Okay. So that's the efficient cause of true value. Then the second one, which is the material cause of true value, is the physical and intangible resources necessary for good life, etc., etc. And even the word resources might not be the best one, because we don't want to treat the environment and nature as just resources, but also this capacity of nature to regenerate itself, to restore and regenerate itself. And humans are part of nature. We should stop separating humans from nature. That's why we use the term more than human constantly in this book. The third one is the commoning sources of conviviality, which is the formal cause, and this solidarity between humans and non-humans, so between more than human populations, living well together, self-love and care for the other, as well as their relative autonomy and deep interdependence and plurality or diversity of their life words, and their communal solidarity. This is the formal cause of true value. When we have such a thing, we are actually witnessing the third cause of true value happening. And the fourth one is the alterity. And as I said before, the final cause of true value is true value itself, is the good quality of life. But when we talk about final cause, because good quality of life is the end result, and the end result cannot be the cause of what causes it. So it cannot be the cause of its cause. It would be a theological reasoning to say that the end result causes itself, or the end result, which is the effect, causes the cause of itself, unless you see it as a cycle, unless you see it as something that constantly repeats itself. So, for instance, in the building of good houses, we reflect on the shortcomings of older houses, in the older ways of building houses, and then we make the new houses better, more efficient in terms of energy, more comfortable, more beautiful, etc., etc. So the first thing first, to avoid theological reasoning, circular reasoning, we have to think of causation as a cyclical process. One, and then we have to consider a mechanism that translates that, that would reflect on the end results and idealizes further, and actually then applies that in the next round of production of good life, it applies the lessons already learned. So we call that alterity, that alters for better. So that is the four cause, I would say. So to avoid theological, instead of saying the end result causes itself, we say actually it's alterity as the medium of the final cause plays role here. So creativity, or more than human creative capacity under capitalism turns into labor, hard work bought and sold in the labor market, the material cause of livability and life, natural life, is turned into resources to be used as free gifts of nature endlessly without any limit in the production of capital or commodity, etc., etc. And the third one, the formal cause, the conviviality that exists naturally between humans and non-humans, and among the humans and among the non-human living beings. Now, all those bonds, or all those ties, natural ties, communal ties, are broken and replaced with market relationships that are mediated by money, that are mediated by goods and services and commodities, if you like. And then the final cause, which is the humans or more than human capacities to correct the process, to alter the process for better, to dream of a better world, to move towards realizing a better world by reflecting on the reality itself. That is also being lost, or you would say replaced with superficial, non-transformative and maximum reformist political actions. And as this is how these four causes of true value under capital are turned into four causes of a fetish value that we will talk later when we in the next chapters. Yes, so there's a bit of a conversation here happening. So there's a bit of a problem in the book that I have noticed. So instead of saying the common source of alterity as the final cause, I would say as the medium of the final cause, because the final cause is actually the true value, it's the good quality life. So alterity is the medium of, so in the case of the fourth dimension, fourth cause, we should talk about the medium of the true value, not the true value itself, because true value itself is the final cause, and it would be ironic to say that the end result causes its own cause, unless, as I said before, we think cyclical and we consider a medium that makes that cycle possible. That medium is, or that mechanisms or medium is actually alterity, our capacity to alter things for good. Okay, and then yeah, towards the end of the chapter, we see that actually these four sources of, or four causes of true value are very much intertwined, and a theory, a comprehensive, integrative theory of value needs to consider these connections, actually how creativity, livability, conviviality, and alterity are interconnected. They cannot exist without each other, and it's true, their interactions, by coming together, they make true value possible. They make, in this case, good quality of life possible. And the same can be said about capitalism. Capitalism also has to bring the labor, which is an alienated form of creativity, a perverted form of creativity, together with natural resources that are perverted versions of livability, together with market relationships and competitions and collective work of, or the collectivity of the work of, or the way that they, or the organization of the work under capitalism, which are the perverted versions of modern human conviviality or friendship or solidarity, and together with very superficial ways of altering, that could in the form of superficial political actions. It could be in the form of technological innovation that are practically favor capitalism, not communal well-living. And as we say, perhaps the concept of destructive innovation or creative destruction might be some sort of thing. So alterity is turned into this practically destructive innovations, technological innovations that are their harms are greater than their advantages. So for capitalism to realize capital as its final cause, at its end result, it has to also, or fetish value as its own result, it has to bring those for alienated, perverted forms of causation. Now, as the final point here, as the final point here is that so Marx himself, actually, Marxian value theory, despite those limitations, has its own shows some sort of capacities to go beyond its own limitations. For instance, although Marx focuses mostly on labor as the source of value, but he differentiates between two types of causation. One is active cause, so he considers labor as an active cause, and the other aspects like nature, community, care, etc., he considers them as determining factors. So he acknowledges some types of causation in them, but he does not consider them as active, because only active for Marx is the labor of the laborers. That is the active cause. The other ones are just determining factors. So that differentiation is kind of, I would say, helpful, because it leaves the doors open for considering livability and conviviality and alterity as causes as well. So it has that capacity. But as I said before, Marxian value theory suffers from the symptoms of the problems of the system that it wants to analyze, because it wants to mimic it. It wants to fully reflect what is inside the belly of such a beast, in the internal workings of capitalism. And by doing that, it kind of imposes restrictions that the system has on its own theory. So the theory suffers from the symptoms of the reality. So Marxian value theory reflects the reality of capitalism, where the commoning nature of all four fundamental causes of true value are already perverted into the practices of capital, and their rich organic entanglements or connections are demolished, are removed by turning them into the conditions of possibility for capital. So that's the ending point, and I hope that this presentation of the chapter, you would find that helpful as much as it makes sense to you. To do the assignments, you don't need to understand every point. The reason I'm running this extra Zoom sessions is just to for those of you who want to understand most of the arguments in each chapter, they might be helpful. But in order to do the assignments, you need to be very selective, and see what we can through these conversations in the class, presentations, lecture notes, etc., extra resources, and anything that makes sense out of the text, do the assignments. And also, I have provided you with instructions on how to do assignments, and I'll keep doing that. But I thought that for those of you especially, and also you may let me know if you're finding this presentations of the chapters, the discussion of chapters in this closer and more detailed discussions, if you're finding them helpful for the assignments as well. They should be, but for those of you who want just to be very pragmatic, you can also limit yourself to what makes sense through our class conversations, in the conversations inside the class, and the presentations and the lecture notes, etc., etc. Well, all the best, and I look forward to seeing you in the class in person next week.